the putrid smell of sewage water mixed with her own tears. That's what Carla Jimenez remembered most vividly about the moment she realized she'd been walking in circles for 6 hours underground, only to emerge exactly where she'd started, back in Tijuana. The stranger who'd promised her safe passage to San Diego had led her through a nightmare maze of tunnels that went nowhere but back to Mexico. She stood there in the pre-dawn darkness, covered in filth, her life savings of $6,000 gone, watching a man who betrayed her count bills by the light of his phone. The worst part wasn't the stolen money or the wasted night crawling through human waste. It was knowing she had to call her mother in Guatemala and tell her that the family's entire future, sold land, borrowed money, years of sacrifice, had disappeared into the pockets of a con artist who specialized in selling false hope to the desperate. 3 weeks earlier, everything had seemed possible. The 32-year-old former teacher had made it to Tijuana after a grueling journey through Mexico, surviving on buses and the kindness of strangers. She'd spent her nights in shelters, her days looking for legitimate ways to cross. But every legal avenue led to the same dead end, wait times measured in years, not months. Her teenage daughter back home needed surgery that Guatemala's hospitals couldn't provide. Years were a luxury she couldn't afford. That's when she met him at the plaza near the border fence. The man looked ordinary enough, middle-aged, well-dressed, speaking with the authority of someone who'd done this countless times. He didn't approach her directly. Instead, she overheard him talking to another migrant about a guaranteed route through old sewer lines that connected Tijuana to San Diego. Ancient infrastructure, he explained, that predated modern border security. The conversation seemed natural, unforced. The other migrant asked questions she wanted to ask herself. How many people had he helped? Dozens, he claimed. How long would it take? 6 hours maximum. Was it safe? Uncomfortable, but safer than the desert. The price made her flinch. $6,000. But he showed photos on his phone of smiling people standing in what looked like San Diego, holding signs thanking him. She waited until the other migrant left before approaching. The man seemed reluctant to take her at first, claiming he only helped men because the journey was difficult for women. This reverse psychology worked perfectly. She insisted she was strong, that she'd already survived worse. He appeared to consider it, then finally agreed, warning her she'd need waterproof bags for her documents and a change of clothes to the other side. The plan seemed sophisticated. They'd enter through a storm drain in an industrial area of Tijuana at 3 a.m. when security was lightest. He knew which cameras worked and which were decoys. He'd done this route 47 times, he said, showing her a notebook with dates and names. She later realized the entries were all in the same handwriting, the dates suspiciously regular. On the appointed night, she met him at a warehouse parking lot. 3 other migrants were already there. 2 young men from Honduras and an older woman from El Salvador. Everyone had plastic bags wrapped around their waists containing documents, money, and phone numbers written on waterproof paper. They all wore dark clothing as instructed, faces tight with nervous anticipation. The entrance to the drainage system was hidden behind a rusted fence in an area that smelled of chemicals and decay. The man produced a key for the padlock, another sign of his supposed expertise. He distributed cheap headlamps and latex gloves, professional touches that reinforced the illusion of competence. Then he lifted the heavy metal grate, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. The smell hit immediately, a thick, choking stench that made her eyes water. Raw sewage mixed with industrial runoff created a toxic atmosphere that burned her nostrils. The tunnel was smaller than expected, forcing them to walk hunched over. Murky water reached mid-calf, sometimes rising to their knees when they hit deeper sections. He led confidently, narrating their progress like a tour guide. They were under the industrial district now, he said. In 30 minutes, they'd reached the international line. By dawn, they'd emerge in a park in San Diego where his partner would be waiting with a van. His constant chatter filled the oppressive space, preventing anyone from thinking too clearly about the journey's logic. The tunnels branched endlessly. Left here, right there, straight through intersections where multiple pipes met. She tried to memorize the route, but quickly became disoriented. The sameness of the concrete walls, the constant sound of flowing water, the play of shadows from their headlamps. It all blended into a nauseating kaleidoscope. After 2 hours, the older woman began struggling. The toxic fumes and physical strain were taking their toll. She vomited twice, the sound echoing horribly in a confined space. The guide showed no sympathy, urging them to keep moving. They were close, he insisted. Just another hour. But an hour passed, then two. The tunnels seemed endless, each turn leading to another identical passage. The water grew deeper in places, forcing them to wade chest-high through unspeakable filth. Her waterproof bags proved useless against such submersion. She felt her documents dissolving, her money soaking through despite the plastic protection. 5 hours in, one of the Honduran men finally voiced what she'd been thinking. They were lost. Or worse, they were being led in circles. The guide's confident demeanor cracked slightly. He insisted they were on track, that American sewers were simply more complex than Mexican ones. The lie was transparent, but what choice did they have but to follow? The truth revealed itself in the cruelest way possible. After 6 hours of underground hell, they climbed a ladder toward a circle of pre-dawn light. She emerged first, grateful for fresh air despite the circumstances. But as her eyes adjusted, her heart sank. The warehouse district looked familiar. Too familiar. A street sign confirmed her worst fear. They were back in Tijuana. The guide emerged last, his expression no longer maintaining any pretense. He demanded their remaining money, payment for protection during their underground journey. When the Honduran men protested, he produced a knife. The threat was clear. They'd been robbed twice, once of their money up front, now of whatever they'd tried to protect. She handed over her last $500, hidden in her bra. The others surrendered their meager reserves. The older woman had nothing left, having spent everything on the initial payment. The guide searched her roughly anyway, finding only worthless papers turned to pulp by sewage water. Then he simply walked away, leaving them standing in a parking lot in their filth-covered clothes as the sun rose over Tijuana. No explanation, no apology, just a predator moving on to the next hunt. She watched him check his phone, probably arranging to meet the next group of desperate souls willing to follow a stranger into the darkness. The immediate aftermath was a blur of humiliation and despair. They found a public bathroom where they tried to clean themselves, but the smell lingered. Her clothes were ruined, her documents destroyed, her money gone. The phone numbers she'd carefully protected were illegible smears. She had nothing left but the clothes on her back and a story no one would want to hear. The other migrants dispersed quickly, each dealing with their devastation privately. The older woman collapsed on a bench, sobbing uncontrollably. The young men walked away without a word, their dreams as dissolved as the papers in their pockets. She never saw any of them again, though she sometimes wondered if they'd found their way or given up entirely. She spent that first day in a daze, walking the streets of Tijuana like a ghost. The shelter she'd stayed in before wouldn't take her back. She smelled too bad, looked too broken. A kind woman at a church gave her clean clothes and access to a shower. It took 3 washes to feel remotely human again, though the psychological stench proved harder to remove. The call to her mother was the hardest thing she'd ever done. How do you explain that you gambled everything on a stranger's promise? That you crawled through sewage for 6 hours only to end up where you started? Her mother cried, not from anger but from helplessness. The money was gone. The land was sold. There was nothing left to try again. Finding work in Tijuana proved almost as difficult as crossing the border. Without documents, she couldn't get legitimate employment. She survived by cleaning houses for cash, sleeping in a room she shared with 5 other women. Every peso went towards slowly rebuilding her documents and saving for another attempt. Months passed in this limbo. She heard stories of others who'd fallen for similar scams. Fake coyotes who led people through tunnels to nowhere, across bridges that circled back, into trucks that drove in loops before dumping their passengers back where they started. The border had created an entire economy of false hope. The psychological toll was severe. She'd wake at night feeling like she was back in those tunnels, drowning in filth while following a lying voice. The smell of sewage, even from a distance, triggered panic attacks. She couldn't trust anyone who offered help, seeing potential deception in every kindness. Her daughter's condition worsened back home. The surgery that had seemed urgent became critical. Phone calls became exercises in mutual helplessness. Her daughter needing what she couldn't provide, her unable to explain why she'd failed. The geographic distance felt like nothing compared to the gulf between their needs and her abilities. She met other victims of the tunnel scam at the shelters and churches. Some had been led to the same routes multiple times by different guides, hoping each time that this one was legitimate. The tunnels were real. Everyone agreed on that. But they were a maze designed to confuse, not a path designed to cross. The guides knew every turn that led back to Mexico. One woman told her about reporting the scam to police. The officers had laughed. What crime had been committed? She'd voluntarily followed a stranger into sewers. She'd paid for an illegal service. If anything, she was a criminal for attempting to cross illegally. The law offered no protection for those operating outside it. 8 months after the tunnel incident, she tried again with a different coyote, this time crossing through the desert. That attempt also failed, though at least it failed honestly. Caught by Border Patrol and deported rather than deceived from the start. Each failure added layers to her trauma, but giving up meant accepting her daughter would die. She learned the tunnel scammer's real name eventually. Ricardo Molina, though he used dozens of aliases. Other victims shared stories about him dating back years. He supposedly lived in a nice house in Tijuana, built on the broken dreams of migrants. Some said he had protection from local police, paying them a percentage of his earnings. The sophisticated nature of his operation became clearer through these conversations. He had spotters who identified new arrivals, people who spread stories about successful crossings, even fake migrants who testified to his reliability. The notebook full of names she'd seen was probably real, a record of everyone he'd robbed. 1 year after following him into the sewers, she saw him again at the same plaza. He was talking to a young couple, showing them something on his phone. The same gestures, probably the same photos, certainly the same lies. She wanted to warn them, but knew intervention might put her in danger. Instead, she watched them fall under his spell, knowing they'd soon be walking through darkness toward disappointment. The cruelest part of the scam was how it corrupted hope itself. Every legitimate opportunity now seemed like a potential trap. When a real humanitarian group offered legal assistance, she almost walked away, convinced it was another elaborate deception. Trust, once broken in those tunnels, proved nearly impossible to rebuild. She still lives in Tijuana, 3 years later. Her daughter survived thanks to a medical charity, though with complications that might have been avoided with earlier treatment. The teacher who once shaped young minds now cleans offices at night, sending every spare peso home. She's documented now, slowly building toward a legal crossing that might take another 5 years. Sometimes she passes storm drains and sewage outlets, and her body remembers the weight of that water, the press of those walls, the voice leading her nowhere. She thinks about all the others who followed similar voices into similar darkness, emerging broke and broken in the same place they started. The border attracts predators who feed on desperation. Some rob with violence, others with elaborate deceptions. Ricardo Molina specialized in the cruelest theft of all, stealing hope while pretending to provide it, turning the underground darkness into a profitable maze where the only exit led back to square one. Her story serves as a warning in the shelters now. When new arrivals speak of tunnel routes and guaranteed passages, she shows them the scars on her feet from walking through that toxic water. She tells them about the notebook full of names, the photos of grateful clients, the confident guide who knew every turn. Most don't listen. Desperation makes people vulnerable to anyone offering certainty. They follow new strangers into new tunnels, convinced their guide is different. Their outcome will be better. Some emerge where they started, poorer but wiser. Others disappear entirely, lost in the literal and metaphorical underground of border crossings. She no longer dreams of America the way she once did. The country that seemed like salvation has become simply another place on a map, separated by more than just a fence. The real barrier isn't the physical border, but the human cruelty that profits from others' dreams. When people ask if she regrets following that stranger, she says no. Regret implies a choice, and desperation offers none. She did what every parent would do, risked everything for their child's chance at life. That the risk led through sewage and deception doesn't diminish the love that drove it. Now she waits, works, and warns others. Legal crossing remains a distant possibility, made more distant by the years lost to false promises. But she persists because the alternative, giving up entirely, would mean those 6 hours in the tunnels truly led nowhere. The tunnel still exists, she knows. Ricardo Molina or someone like him still guides groups through its branches, collecting money for journeys that end where they begin. The sewage still flows, carrying broken dreams and dissolved documents toward the sea. And somewhere in Tijuana tonight, another desperate parent is listening to a confident stranger describe a guaranteed route through the darkness, ready to follow despite all warnings, because hope is stronger than fear and desperation drowns out doubt.